Welcome to Psychology Ninjas. Today we're looking at factors affecting prejudice, specifically looking at situation and culture. So how are you going to tackle your explanation of factors? Well, we're going to think of this like we do a theory, and in order to explain our two factors, we need to explain the key terms associated with them. Let's start with situation. So with situation then, we want to be talking about these three key concepts or three key terms. Within this specifically, we want to focus in on zero-sum situations, and in relation to prejudice, this is going beyond negative interdependence that we talked about in realistic conflict theory. Here what we're saying is actually, rather than just competing with each other on one win, one loses, that if I help somebody else, it's going to come at a cost to myself. So I'm in a worse position than I was. Equally within these, we need to be really clear about how this is linking to prejudice, and prejudice being the outcome of these views. Our other factor then is culture. And within this, we're going to talk about these different cultural and broader cultural norms than a specific group. Where we're talking about microaggressions in the norm of intolerance, we're saying those kind of shady or backwards compliments rather than being overtly prejudicial. We're also going to talk about this idea of benevolent intolerance, in that we nicely just don't address things or we ignore things rather than challenging those microaggressions. Again, what we want to talk about when we're discussing individualism and collectivism is linking this specifically back to prejudice as a behaviour, focusing on which cultures are more likely to be prejudicial and why. So we've got our explanation and we know our key terminology. How are we going to evaluate? Well, when it comes to this, we're going to evaluate using SODA as we would do a theory. Here we've got our supporting argument, our opposing argument, a different theory, and we want to be really clear about why this is better, and our application. So when we're coming to our research and when we're explaining each of these paragraphs, we want to have some arguments and counter-arguments, some extension beyond this, in order to develop those logical chains of reasoning. We're always going to have a link at the end, which is like a mini conclusion or judgment in relation to the paragraph that we've just discussed, and this is going to help us form our balanced conclusion at the end. So if we've got this 8 marker, evaluate the influence of situation and culture on prejudice, how are we going to construct it? Well, we're going to think about tailoring and tying our AO1, our knowledge, our explanation, with different pieces of evaluation. So we're going to start off by talking about social norms within a specific situation, and then we're going to talk about supporting research from Akrami et al. And this was a Swedish piece of research that looked at manipulating social norms about prejudice and sexism, and how the different respondents reacted to that. But we're going to give a counter argument here because they also found that personality variables were important, specifically right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation. This is going to question the accuracy or the validity of situation as a factor. We're then going to move on to look at the norm of fairness and explain that. And our opposing to this research is actually that within a culture there are subgroups. Orpen found this in relation to F-scale scores, and we know that as part of an authoritarian personality. However, we've got Weatherall's research here that suggests that there are norms of fairness within different groups, and therefore our mini conclusion is to talk about that there are extraneous variables within a culture that may affect the level of prejudice. Next, we want to move on to discussing individualism versus collectivism. And here what we want to be doing is making sure that we've made it linked explicitly back to prejudice. When we're talking about our different theory here, we're going to be talking about personality. We need to explain what right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation are. And our mini conclusion is that we need a holistic approach using both or all of these factors in order to explain prejudice. Finally, we're going to look at competition and resource stress, and we've got our practical application of how we might use or target zero-sum beliefs in order to reduce prejudice. Given that this could have a counter or a boomerang effect, and with social dominance orientation encourage or create negative attitudes, we want to be critical of the reliability of this factor. Okay, so let's have a look at this in relation to an exam question. We always want to be really careful that we know what the command word is, and in this case it's discuss. With a discuss question, we're explaining and applying using lots and lots of examples. We don't need to give any evaluation here. What we need to be doing is linking our factors affecting prejudice to Millie's experience, specifically situation and culture. We need to bear in mind that we're talking about a school and students, house cup versus year groups, in order to tailor our examples accordingly. So what we want to be doing is giving as many examples as we possibly can. So we'd firstly explain social norms as a situational factor, and then we're linking this into our scenario, saying that the students at Millie's new school have internalised the competition between the houses, and this is what is creating the prejudice. You might give specific examples of unwritten rules of behaviour in terms of which houses should be targeted, or maybe how students might interact in a prejudicial way. You work through this then, explaining the AO1 and then giving lots of examples. You can see down where we're talking about a norm of intolerance that we had lots more examples here, and you might be able to think of more in relation to the other topics. We want to have 8 discrete applications here, and the more detailed we can make them, the better our result is going to be. Here's a second exam question. Assess the influence of developmental psychology in explaining prejudice. Here is our command word assess, and here we need to explain and evaluate. When we're talking about developmental psychology, what we're saying is anything that might change over time, or that as we bring up children might have an impact on their behaviour. We're also talking about how childhood and these processes have a lasting impact in terms of adulthood. And we're explaining this in relation to prejudice. We're basically talking about our different factors affecting prejudice. What we would need to do here in our AO1 is really focus on that idea of developmental psychology, talking about childhood and how this would affect socialisation. Everything else is pretty much the same, but we're making that explicit link to the question that we've been set. Thank you for joining us today here at Psychology Ninjas. Make sure that you like our content if you have liked it, and you feel free to give us a comment down below. If you would like to receive notifications and get updates on new content that's always coming out, please don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.